Hello, today we're going to be talking about rhetorical writing. And rhetorical writing is something that was begun by Aristotle. That's a picture of Aristotle right there. Well, not a picture of him, but it's a statue of him. He is a Greek writer, ancient Greek writer. He did a lot of studying on writing and rhetoric and rhetorical writing. So we're going to talk about that today. So first, there are the rhetorical appeals that we're going to be looking at. And the main three, there's four, but the main three are logos, ethos, and pathos. You probably heard those many times. The Apostle Paul was really good at using these. If you look at any of the epistles that Paul wrote, you will find logos, ethos, and pathos throughout them. And it helps to solidify his argument completely. First, we'll look at logos. Logos is translated from the Greek to logic, basically. We get the words logic from logos if you do some etymology and look at the word. Logos comprises of your logic, the facts that you will find, the figures, the data that you will look, and it's basically the proof of the research. So when you're using logos, you are helping to build based on all of the data that you have got. And it's very important because many arguments will not stand without the logos being added to them. So it's very important. The other side, or another part of argument, is ethos. And ethos is the looking at the authority of the person that is speaking, or the authority of the argument itself. It's looking at the credibility. Is this person credible enough? Are they believable enough? What are their qualifications for this? On some of your papers, I might have written, what is this person's qualification? For instance, if you just use a person's name, if I told you that Fred Smith told me that I had a bad cold and I should take medicine, that could be anything. Fred Smith could be just a random person. But if I say Dr. Fred Smith, that changes it completely. Dr. Fred Smith said that I have a cold and I should be taking medicine. So there's qualifications that are added to his name, that he's a doctor. It adds to the ethos that you are using. It shows the authority. Ethos can also be a notable figure. So somebody that is important in this certain field. Or ethos could be used by your mastery of terminology. If you're using all the right words in all the right ways, you have good ethos. For instance, some of the reading that I do in my spare time and my fun time is reading about their thriller novels and thrillers and mysteries and things. And I am more willing to read somebody that has some credibility because they have the mastery of the terminology. They're using all the right phrases, all the right statements. And I think I mentioned this before. One of my favorite authors, his name is David Morrell, and he has a mastery of terminology with everything that he does because of the specific research that he does. And the research really lends to the ethos of the reading that I'm doing, because he's a mastery of the terminology. And I know I've said that a few times, but it's very important because when you're talking about something like a gun and you say the pointy thing at the end, it doesn't have a mastery of terminology as opposed to the sights or you say the boom thing instead of a gun or a bullet or something like that. But having a mastery of the terminology introduces the authority of the writer and introduces the authority to the subject itself. Ethos can also be brought as into your paper by being introduced as an authority by somebody. So if you've seen this as the beginning of a speech where somebody introduces somebody, you say, this person is an authority in this field. So if you introduce them as an authority, then it helps to build the ethos. And ethos is enhanced by logos, meaning that all of these things that will go into logos enhance the ethos because you are using the facts and stats and things that are built within the logic side of it. And then last is pathos. I chose this picture for pathos because this picture alone can show a few different things. It can show that there is emotion there. You can, if you are a dog lover, you can look at that dog's face and you can see that that dog is sad for being there because he's chained up to that newspaper box instead of able to go inside the restaurant. So there's the emotion that is built with pathos. There's sympathy that you can have in there, and also empathy. So you can feel sorry for somebody, or you can feel their feelings, or you can put yourself in their place. And both of these, sympathy and empathy, they are helpful when you are building an argument. When you're using pathos, you're also adding metaphor or simile to there. And metaphor and simile can be used in certain ways so you can bring in the emotional appeal to the writing. Pathos can come from the passion and delivery. So if somebody is very passionate about their subject, even if they're just talking completely on the logo side, if there is passion in that delivery, then you feel as an audience member or as a reader of an argument, you can feel that there's passion in there, so you're more likely to get on somebody's side. You can use pathos to appeal to the unjust or appeal with unjust claims. Things like, it is unjust that this dog is tied to this newspaper box. He should be allowed to go into this restaurant. Why are there no pets allowed in certain restaurants? That kind of thing. So you can appeal to unjust claims there. And also with pathos, you can have a discussion of values. So you can appeal to the way that people feel about certain subjects. With basics of logic, that is, you need to get into all of these positions. So you want to appeal to the heart, the head, and the credibility. So follow the basic logic here, the basics of logic. One of the first things that you're going to look for are the claim in your basics of logic. So the claim that you are making in your argument, in your rhetorical appeal, has to be something that a reasonable person might disagree with. Not just somebody that's argumentative, but somebody that you could possibly go up to on the street and make a reasonable claim, and somebody might say, you know what, I disagree with that. So the basics of logic will have claim, reason, and evidence. And if you remember from last week, we talked about some things that are not arguable. Verifiable facts are not arguable. Issues of faith or belief are not arguable, and opinion are not arguable. Those things either cannot be changed or typically are not changed. So a verifiable fact, you can't argue that 1 + 1 = 4. It just doesn't work like that because that's not possible. 1 plus 1 always equals 2 in the basic sense. You can't argue issues of faith or belief because typically you're not going to change somebody's faith or belief in an argument statement. And it's hard to change somebody's opinion. If it is your opinion that chocolate chip cookies are terrible, first off, I would say you were wrong, but then I would say that that's your opinion. So it's not something that you can argue through or with. So just try to remember to stay away from those claims. So things are not, I'm sorry, not stay away from those claims, but stay away from these things that are not arguable, the facts, the faith, and the opinion. When you are writing, you want to make sure that you are qualifying your claim. And qualifying the claim is basically saying that there are certain circumstances with certain conditions, and there might be limitations. So you've got to qualify it. Look at the certain conditions. So a certain condition, this is in your textbook, talked about the freedom of speech. Yes, there is freedom of speech, but what about people that talk about things that are not true? So you could sue somebody for libel or for slander, because even though it's freedom of speech, those are lies, technically, depending on which side they are. There's also certain circumstances that you want to, certain circumstances or conditions that you want to look at. So like recycling, there are certain circumstances within it that you could talk about. So certain things might be able to be recycled, but they should only be recycled by a qualified person or qualified company. You're not just going to give me your old laptop or your old cell phone and expect me at my house to be able to recycle that. So you can also qualify your claim by looking at different things like certain groups. So low carb dieting has some qualifications behind it, but there's certain people that should not be in the low carb diet. For instance, people that are diabetic should not be in low carb because they're going to have adverse effects to a low carb diet. Some words that you're going to want to look for when you're qualifying your claim are sometimes, nearly, rarely, usually, possibly, in most cases. So this is a way that you can help qualify your claim. Just make sure that you are able to look at the possibility there's limitations. It's going to help you when you're qualifying to make your argument a little bit smaller than it possibly is. So the second part of the arguing logically is the reasons. And your reasons will support your claim. They will be linked to it with the word because. So if your claim is that college students should always strive to complete your class because they will be able to go into the next class. So if you can write your claim out and you link it to because and you add a reason, it adds a purpose to the reason that you're writing the paper. So it adds a purpose to it. So your reason can be a rule or a principle. And your reason should ask the question why. Why am I arguing this claim? And then lastly, in the arguing logically with your claims, your reasons, your last is the evidence. We talked at length about this last week with the facts and stats and examples and authorities and anecdotes, things this evidence that you want to use. This is going to be the major part of your paper that's going to help your claim or your argument to be stronger. Because without facts and stats, without your visuals or the anecdotes you're using, then the evidence that you are supplying is not going to be strong enough. And I suggest that you choose your appropriate evidence in your papers, because sometimes an anecdote will not work where a specific paraphrase or a quote will. And sometimes a scenario is not going to work when what people are really looking for is an example. So make sure that you have the strong evidence for your papers where you are able to support the claim itself. This is going to be probably the major part of it, because evidence, an argument without evidence is just an opinion. And lastly, when you are working on your papers, you want to make sure that your information is trustworthy and that you are trustworthy as a writer. So the way you do that is you build common ground. You find some sort of agreement that you can build off of in your argument. Things where they are wide enough views of an argument, there's a common ground somewhere in there. So start with building the common ground and then acknowledge the other views. And because if you are being trustworthy in your writing and you're acknowledging the other views, you're saying, look, there's other people out there, there's other beliefs out there, but here's mine and here's why I believe it. Here's what I say, and here's what I agree with. So if you don't ever acknowledge that there's another view, then your writing is not going to be trustworthy. You also want to accommodate the other views. So talk about them, talk around them, discuss them in your writing. And when you do that, you are helping to bring the facts from their side to help build your argument. And then sometimes you're going to need to refute the other views, and this is using their evidence against them. And you can say, they believe this, I believe that. Here's the information that proves my side. There are arguments I have seen that have shown that secondhand smoke hurts nobody. But then there are other papers that are written using the same evidence that says secondhand smoke is dangerous. So it just depends on how the information is looked at. I read an article very recently that said that there was no statistical difference between using a parachute and jumping out of a plane and not using a parachute and jumping out of a plane. There was no evidence showing that it was deadly or safer to use a parachute. Now that sounds really, really weird. And this paper was written specifically to talk about scientific evidence, because what they did is it's impossible to find somebody that is going to agree to be the person to jump out of a plane without a parachute. And you're going to find many more people that are going to want to jump out of a plane with a parachute. So you can't have that side of the no parachute side be represented in your argument and in your paper. So what they did is they said, here, half people had a backpack, half of the people had a parachute. But the truth of it was that the airplane was not running, and the airplane was the door was 4 feet off the ground, so nobody was going to get hurt. And the reason for the argument and that paper and discussion was to talk about data. And so, in all of that to say that they use the data to prove that other viewpoints might or might not be wrong just based on your interpretation of the data. So use it to refute the other views. And then watch out for the 9 logical fallacies. That's ad hominem, the bandwagon appeals, begging the question, either or arguments, false analogies, false causality, straw man, hasty generalization, and